Got it? Okay, once we get to the next save point, we will be moving on to story time. It's gonna be a 17 to 20-minute read. Just a note. Let me just make sure to restart from the checkpoint really quick. Yeah, this is the next checkpoint. Okay, so let's go ahead and get the story time started. So this story that I'm gonna be reading, it's a rewrite of a past story that I've written, and for any of you guys who were there for my VARC SMP, that were there for when I was in the VARC SMP, probably have heard this story at some point. It's called Clay, and I took time to rewrite it, because I thought, why not? So you guys can read this, right? Is that readable? Is that readable? We have the story now, yay! We figured it out, thank goodness. Wait, also, I did a thingy, I did a thing. I made this specifically for the story time. Isn't it fun? Isn't that fun? I have a little thing for reading story times. Okay, so this story is called Clay. I wrote it all. This was part of I saw like I remember the first time I wrote it, I saw like some type of like, they were like, what you call it? The like plot ideas. Like, this stemmed from a plot idea that was, like on TikTok, they do like story plots or story prompt ideas. It's about like someone falling in love with a statue. So it kind of stemmed from that idea of someone falling in love with a statue. Let's get started for story time. From a young age, he had always shown artistic ability. He loved creating things with his hands, playing with mud, and building figures with it. His parents were in love with his talent. They'd feel the shapes and with great precision guess what he had made. It was a befitting name they gave him, Clay. As he got older, he requested his parents to buy him clay and tools and to allow him to create even more detailed sculptures. Clay held on to every feeling he made with his hands, a slight fear in the back of his mind, a curse inflicted on Clay's family. Every single family member would face some incident before the age of 18. They were all left blind and unable to see. And if you married into the family, you were guaranteed to lose your sight shortly after the wedding. But by the time Clay had reached the age of 21, he still had his eyesight intact. Clay's family celebrated him. He'd truly broken the curse in some strange way. There were guesses, but despite them, the fact remained. The curse had left his family. Clay decided to celebrate this feat. He would attend art school. Fathers, I wish to attend Evermore Lane College, he exclaimed to them. They were shocked at his sudden decision, but otherwise in support. Evermore Lane College was mostly known for its specialty in magic training, but those who did their research correctly also found its special trade in teaching art. Clay had signed himself up quickly for the art and history classes. He was genuinely excited to start a new chapter of his life. The day came for him to leave, and he held his fathers in a warm embrace. They shared a few tears, reminiscing on the past. After the tears, the fathers wished him goodbye. They were telling him to visit his old men and to not forget them. He shouted with a smile that he loved him and would visit them when summer break came, and with that, Clay headed off on his journey. It took Clay 18 hours to arrive at the college. The entire city and college were utterly different than what he had been used to. Grand and significant architecture. Sea green accent colors filled his eyes as the bright whites of the walls blinded him. It truly lived up to the names of the land once belonging to the most successful royal lineage in the world. Clay went to the administrative office to receive information on his dorm and classes. Once received, he made his way to the dorm room. He quickly met his roommate, a funny individual they were for sure. They unpacked together, chatting and laughing about their own past stories. Then, as the hours passed, they felt as if they were the best of friends. Deciding to end the night with a good meal, they headed off to see the city lights and try some delicious food. After a week, classes would start up. Clay had prepped himself for this moment. He was excited and ready. His fingers were itching to mold some clay into whatever his mind wanted him to turn it into. Once his art class rolled around, he was the first one there. He chatted with the teachers and viewed past students' sculptures, so many beautiful ones that needed to be gazed at with the utmost respect. The class would begin, and the teachers would have the students participate in an icebreaker. Students needed to answer with their names, where they were from, and the first thing they ever made with clay. Then one by one, the students answered. Clay listened carefully, curious if anyone was from the same town as him. If one student was, she caught his attention as she spoke. She introduced herself as Robin, and Clay wanted to get to know her. Once the icebreaker was concluded, the teacher would begin a quick lecture. He discussed the basics of the tools that he would use throughout the year, different projects he had planned, and some trips the class would take together. The lesson took no more than 20 to 30 minutes. With it done, he allowed his students to do what they wanted for the rest of class. For the rest of the day, Clay would be quick with his chance to meet the other students. He was saying hi to one and moving to the next. Clay quickly made his way to Robin, wanting to say hi to her right before the teacher dismissed them. As he approached her, his greeting was cut short by the teacher dismissing them. A brief statement of tomorrow's plans, a wrench thrown into Clay's plan for sure. But he would try the next class again. In the meantime, he would at least take time to plan what he'd make for the class, with the 2-day pause between the course. The 2 days of planning passed, with Clay quickly returned to his course. He had a plan in mind. With the sculptures he made, he planned to recreate it on his last day of college. How ecstatic he felt when Clay thought about his plans to see his improvement. The professor arrived a bit later than the students, quickly starting the class as soon as he had arrived. He commanded the students to begin working on whatever sculptures they had in mind. Finally, the professor explained he would review every student's work. He wanted to see their skills and build an individual plan to prove where they needed to. Clay wanted to create something for his fathers, a small thank you gift. He had known his dads and thought he had broken the family curse. But he had a different thought in mind. Clay believed maybe his father's devout and loyal love for one another was why it had broken in the first place. Clay would make 2 hands clasping one another in a loving embrace. A cloth covering the hands would be ripped and burned. Clay was pleased with this plan and quickly got to work. The professor played soft jazz music in the background as the students worked. Many students would chat with one another while the others worked in silence. Time quickly passed for Clay as he spoke with the other students who sat nearby him, discussing past stories he had. Before he realized it, he'd finished his project and got set to paint before tossing it in the oven. Clay took a moment to look over to see what Robin was making quickly. She was still quietly working far on the other side of the classroom. Robin was one of the few students who had used stone and chiseling tools to create their artworks, but of course, Clay was useless about the methods sculptors used. He took it as an opportunity to gain some knowledge from her. Clay approached her area of work, and when he got closer, he had found she had suddenly become frozen. She was staring straight up at her almost near completion creation. It was beautiful. The stone forming into a woman, her arms crossed over each other, and her hands held up to her chest. A gaze of love chiseled into its face. "It's beautiful," he said out loud. Robin turned her head to look at him, a smile forming as she nodded in agreement. "She is. I'm calling her Ashley." Clay looked at Robin and began chatting away with her. They got along instantly, even more so than he had imagined. So they chatted nonstop about one another's work, before they even realized that the professor was interrupting them, letting them know the class was dismissed and for them to head out. As the professor headed out, they quietly laughed and they got each other's phone numbers. Clay had become incredibly close friends with Robin as the weeks flew by. They did everything and went everywhere together. They were class clowns, the pair of them, but it was never a bother to students or the professor. Despite it all, Clay began noticing a unique pattern with her. Robin has only made the same sculpture. Even when working with other materials, she always made Ashley, always identical and exact. At first, it was a bit startling, but he quickly got used to the strange phenomenon Robin performed. It wasn't enough for him to lose these developing feelings he had been gaining for her, at least. But of course, Clay wasn't ready to express them to Robin yet. At least, that's what he thought. That day, the day in particular, was much warmer than usual. Clay felt more tired and out of sync. It was odd, and the professor, of course, had called Clay and Robin to stay behind to clean up the classroom. The conclusion of class came quickly, and the students shuffled out of the room, heading to whatever next they were going to. Clay started quickly cleaning up the tools, wiping down the tables, etc. Whatever needed to be done, he was on it. Clay looks to find Robin standing before Ashley like she usually does, just staring up constantly, her eyes heavily fixated on it. But Robin seemed so beautiful. Clay's legs began acting on its own, moving towards her, before he realized that he had grabbed her attention. They stared at one another, and Clay didn't even notice he had suddenly begun embracing her. The summer heat must have numbed Clay's reading abilities. He should have realized he should have stopped, but Clay didn't. Instead, he brought his lips to hers, and when he parted, he spoke. "Robin, I have feelings for you. I truly think you are my soulmate." Her face would twist with confusion. She didn't know how to react. Why would you do that?" she said. She began shifting her eyes all over the room before turning to her statue. She gasped, tears filling her eyes. Her head quickly turned to look at him. "You selfish bastard! What did you do to me?" she shouted through tears. Robin would storm out of the room, shoving right past him. Clay was shocked by everything that occurred. He began thinking back to every moment between the two, and it was a one-sided romance, he realized. The day would pass into the next, morning soon arriving. That morning, Clay was making his way to lecture, and he would catch a sight of the place along the way. Clay was a bit shocked. That thing never happened on campus. He'd make his way over like many other students were doing. He realized the police were right in front of Robin's dorm building. Clay began looking around frantically, and when he saw Robin's roommate talking to a police officer, he would wait quietly before he had a chance to approach. "What happened?" he had asked, his voice quivering from fear of her answer. The roommate began crying softly. Through her tears, she managed to get a response. "Robin, she's dead. I found her this morning. I should have gone back home last night." Clay's world shattered. She was dead, and so many thoughts began to race through his mind. If this didn't happen, she would be here. If I did this instead, she would be here. Why did I do that? He couldn't get his mind right. Before he realized it, he stumbled into the art room. He would collapse to the ground. He was sobbing loudly, heaving loudly. He felt agony like nothing else he had ever felt. But as he cried, he began feeling like he was being watched. He looked up from the ground and around the room. He couldn't see anyone else, but it felt as if Clay knew precisely what was staring at him. So he quickly whipped around to stare right back at Ashley. That didn't make sense. But why was it always staring like that? Clay rose to his feet, wiping his tears away. They approached the statue with much caution. He stared quietly, taking on every detail before noticing the hands. He suddenly felt cold, every hair on his body standing up. Every bone in his body was screaming run, but he couldn't. Bloody covered hands were gripping his face, its face staring right back at him through the peaks of its fingers. Clay would let out a blood-curdling scream, his fingers reaching out with stone-cold hands gripping his face, and the fingers pressed on his eyes. Why did Robin keep making it? Who was Ashley? Why was Robin so obsessed with it? The curse, the family curse, it didn't break. This is it. His thoughts were screamed as his vocal cords became damaged from his continuous screaming. Soon, a sharp pain would shoot through his head. He was let go, and he fell to the ground. He reached for his eyes, his hands hurt, searching for something no longer there. He couldn't see anymore, and he couldn't feel his eyes anymore. Rage would shoot through Clay, and he began searching for Ashley, shouting and screaming incoherently. He heard the shuffling of people behind him. Some unknown person, but most likely the police, grabbing him as Clay was put into cuffs. He kept screaming for Robin, pleading for her to come back and save him. Clay would be escorted off campus. Clay was found guilty for the murder of Robin, his blood found on her. Clay held his status of being innocent, shouting to anyone who would listen about how it was the statue who murdered Robin and stole his eyes. No one ever believed him. And thus was the end of Clay and his beautiful clay creations. And that concludes story time. We had people listening to know my story time. I'm super happy about that. But that was my story, Clay. Is there like a way for me to like publish it somewhere? Okay, we're gonna be reading Hexian. So thank you guys so much for the fun stream. Thank you guys so much. I'll see you guys later. Bye bye.